Hi, welcome back to Spring CS170, week 8. Last lecture I just gave you some quick admin stuff. I set up the resources on our page, so you should be able to take a look at that and maybe catch on some of the pointers that I put out there for some common issues or errors. Especially for some of you that tried to do the extra credit and didn't catch on to fixing some of the stuff between the string and the numbers, or doing the on click for the button to do the calculation. It's important, so make sure you take a look at it. So that was in the last video. So for this video, I'm going to step into some of the topic that we're going to cover for this week, which is arrays and loops. Okay, but before we get to that, you have this couple little things that you might find useful. So one of them is, well, in general, this whole thing is talking about getting feedback, right? So one of them is like looking at your code in the browser. I happen to be on Chrome, so I'll pull that here. And so you can remember, here's the browser. It has like your HTML and your JavaScript here. And if you go to here on the right hand side and you go to tools, you can see developer tools here, Control-Shift-I, right? And what that does is brings this up here, and you can see as I scroll through here, it kind of tries to line up to what you see on the browser on the left hand side. Okay, and then you can see at the bottom here some different bits of information. Okay, so that's one way you can look at this. You know, if it's just purely JavaScript code, you know, I think that JS.do works out pretty well too. You can see stuff on there. You have the HTML5 viewer, which I showed you earlier in the semester, which you can see stuff on the right hand side. So whichever way works for you, go and check that out. Okay. Let me see here. The other thing is this validator, and what I did here was I set up, and this is the link here, beautifytools.com JavaScript Validator. So I put that over here, and what I did was I took this code here, which was what I did from the last video, and I put it over to here. So you can see that. When you validate the code, it's interesting. You can take a look here. Expected conditional expression instead of an assignment. So you're here, this is line 22, which is over here, line 22. And this is exactly what I was trying to show you in the last video, where there's a difference between a double equal, triple equal, and the single equal. So anytime you do this if, and then you do this stuff in here, it should be doing a comparison. And actually this validator actually even highlights that. So it tells you there's a conditional expression that it's expecting to see, but instead it sees an assignment. So even the validator points out that this is an issue. Okay, so you know, this might be helpful for you as you try to troubleshoot your code. Let's see what happens if I put in like a syntax error. So what can I do as a syntax error? Maybe I'll do this. And you can see it tells you it's missing the close paren for this if statement, right? So these are useful things that you might want to try out on your own for some of your own code. Okay. This is JS.do. This is stuff that I was playing around with, and you can see like right here we put in something, and then you can see up at the top it tells you that you have a syntax error. Okay, so again, these are a couple of different ways to get some feedback on the quality of your code. I think I pointed out in Notepad++, which was what I was using, and I think all the other editors have some similar type of functionality where they color code things. And you can see when there's a mismatch on your parentheses, let's say, or you want to highlight all of those variables. Let me go back to here. Let me open up this one with Notepad++. And like I said, so I come here, I click on it, you can see where's the instance of those variables are at. Okay, so price per gal, you can see what's here. If I went to here, you can see it highlights all of these. and you're saying, oh, what happened? I thought I had one, let's say down here, but then maybe I had a spelling mistake, so I would find it. So these are a couple of different little helpful things to help you find errors in your code. Okay. Okay, and so if you did everything well, you get something like that, right? In the JavaScript validator, you get no syntax errors, which is good, right? Or even no warnings or hints or anything like that, right? So, what I did here with the conditional expression, that's not really like an error. It's one of those things which, going back to the type of errors that we saw at the beginning of these lectures, the logical error, right? So it's not a syntax error, but I don't think anyone really intends for this to behave. This is the intended behavior that you want to see, which, like I mentioned last video, is having this always be true. You don't want this to always be true, and you don't want this to actually assign the 1 equals into that number, right? So that's like a logic error that you will come up with. So fortunately, it just kind of pulls it up and highlights it, but it doesn't always catch things like this, right? That's the tricky things about logic errors, okay? So, here, lucky, no syntax errors, right? There may be a logic error, but you wouldn't, it's difficult for this to highlight that, right? But at least it'll help you in terms of syntax errors, okay? And I think a number of you talked to me about this already. There's any number of like YouTube videos or W3 schools links that you can go in here. It's nice. You can see examples. You can click on things, and you'll be able to try different things out there to get like working clips of code that you can learn from to apply to your own code. Okay. So what are we going to cover here in chapter 20? It's going to actually be a number of things, but the main topics is loops, okay? And then down here you can see arrays, right? So we're going to break down what a typical loop would look like, and then something called an infinite loop, and then similar to what I was saying before in one of the earlier videos, talking about variable scope, looking at a global variable versus a local variable, and tracing it through, right? And usually that means like sending something from the main program to a function, and you have like variables, and you're gonna have to trace that through during the exam. In a similar way, we're gonna probably have loops, and then you're gonna be able to trace the variables before they go into the loop. What happens when you go the first time through the loop? What happens when you exit the loop? So you'll be tracing variables each time it goes through the loop. Okay, so it's similar to what we talked about in terms of the variable scoping. You'll be doing stuff like that. So this point here says being able to trace through a loop and figure out the values of the variables during the iteration. Okay. Then there's the idea about arrays. How do you declare arrays? How do you initialize arrays? How do you read from arrays or process off arrays? There's all kinds of different things with that, right? So as it says here, declaration, initialization, indexing, length are important aspects of array processing, okay? And then the reason why these two kind of go hand in hand in this chapter is that a lot of times to go through all the elements of the array, you're going to probably use in a loop, okay? So these are the key ideas here, and read along with this in your textbooks on chapter 20, okay? So here, so this is the idea. So let's say you have something that you want to do over and over again, right? In this case, you're saying, well, I want to play this song over and over again. Okay, so then you have this little button here, which looks like a circle with arrows pointing to each other. Okay. So excuse me, and you're gonna be playing it over and over again until you stop it, right? So that's what a loop would do, right? So if you don't do anything, you can have an infinite loop, and it just keeps on going forever, right? But a lot of times we're gonna probably have some sort of criteria to say, when do I want to get out of this loop? I only want to hear this song like 3 times, right? After the 3rd time, I want to get out of that loop. right? Something like that is usually what we're going to be doing with the loops. But like I said, there's times where you're just going to set it to be infinite, and you're going to keep on doing it over and over again. So without using loops, here's something what we can do, right? So you recognize these. We're declaring some variables up here, right? And you initialize them, right? So we declared x equals to 4, y equals to 3, and ants and CNT, right? Now, so here you say, well, if the count is less than or equal to y, which is 3, then you're going to do these calculations here, right? And notice this point, right? You're doing the count equals the count plus 1. So you're incrementing the count. So of course, this will be count equals to 2 now, right? And then you're going to do is the count is CNT less than or equal to y. Well, it's still 3 here, and your count is 2 now. So no, it'll continue to do it, right? And then it's going to increment count again, and then you're going to come down to here, and is it still valid? Yeah, well, count is still less than or equal to 3. In this case, it's equal to 3 because you've made this to 3 now, and it will go. And if you were going to have another count after that, it would not have to go in here because your count would be 4, so you wouldn't do anything, okay? So that's one way to repeat the same code over and over again. It's probably not the best way to do it, right? It's not very flexible. You know, and you're not going to do a whole bunch of these count checks towards infinity. So that's why we have loops, okay? But, you know, what I just demonstrated is one way you can do it. All right, so here's a loop, right? This is the general idea with the loop, and then here's like a for loop on the left-hand side where it says for r equals to 1, and then while r is less than 11, you're going to keep on incrementing it. So r plus plus means you're going to increment the r by 1. You're going to add 1 to whatever the value of r is, okay? So it's similar to this, right? Instead of doing CNT equals to CNT plus 1, you could have done CNT plus plus, right? It's the same thing, okay? You could debate whether like it's better to look at it this way or look at it this way, but that's something that people like to do, right? So they'll do R plus plus, okay? So I'll go more into this, but this part, this line right here where it says the for loop here, that's actually the pretty common way to do these loops, and we're going to probably spend a lot of time. You're going to probably do it. You're going to see on the exam. You're going to probably do it for the assignment. So this is important. So you want to pay attention to this part. Okay. So here's your flowchart action here. Right. You have the start. I know that's supposed to be an oval. Doesn't look quite like an oval to me, but I guess this little bit of curvature here is your oval. So there's your start, and then here's your initialize, which yeah, I guess that looks pretty clearly a rectangle, right? So I guess there's your initialize here. So here's the idea. It does a test, and then if it's false, meaning it fails the test, then it will stop. Otherwise, it's going to go do some work within the loop, and then the increment is the plus here. So how's that match up to here, right? So the initialize would be where this r equals to 1, okay? And then the test would be where r is less than 11, right? That would be like right here where the test is. So if it's less than 11, which in this case we initialize to 1, so it's definitely going to happen, right? So it goes into the body of the loop, and then it goes to the increment, which is this part, the r plus plus. So now the next time around, r is going to equal to 2. Right, and then you can see it's going to keep on going round and round through this loop until it gets to 11. Once it's 11, then obviously it doesn't meet this criteria where r is less than 11 anymore. So then it goes to the false, and then it goes to the stop. All right, so that's how you should read this loop flowchart. Compare how you should read it with this for loop here. Okay? So I think you can read this, right? Loops, sequence of instructions within the program, allows us to execute the code multiple times or iterations. Okay, so iteration means to iterate, right? To do over and over again. Okay, so you have 3 times or 3 iterations. You have a control variable, a test condition, the instructions to execute. You update the control variable, and then you have a way to exit, right? This is generally how you look at loops. Um, you know, like I said, there are such thing as running infinite loops and stuff like that, but let's say for the purpose of this class, this is what you're generally looking for, right? The control variable, the test condition, instructions to execute, the update of the control variable, and the way to exit. So let's go back to here for a second. In this case, the control variable is what? It's R, right? So the control variable is R, and R++ is how you're incrementing it, right? So that's your update of the control variable, right? Your instructions to execute is whatever, right? You can stick anything in here, okay? We don't actually show that in the diagram because it's not important. Whatever you want to put in there, right? It could be this, right? Answer equals to answer times x, right? You could just keep on, you know, updating that every time you go through the body, okay? So this is something you should pay attention to and you should be looking for as we go into this, okay? What is required for the loops here, okay? Well, here we go, for loop. So here's the for loop syntax. You have the initialization, you have the test, and you have the update, okay? And then you have the statement list. Now, syntactically, you don't necessarily have to do this, right? You can actually jam anything you want in here. At the end of the day, these are just places to put some code in, your JavaScript code. And then you can put your statement list, your various commands you want to follow, right? So this is generally how you're going to apply those pieces of code or logic. You're going to do initialization in this part, then you're going to do your test in this part, and then you're going to do your update in this part. But you can kind of jam almost any type of code in there, and it will still work. Not really going to make the loop work probably, but you could stick whatever you want in here. And this point here where it says j++ is the same thing as j equals to j+1. That was the point that I made earlier. Okay? So here's your for loop. You initialize j equal to 1. Here's your test. J is less than or equal to 3. And you have the update, which is incrementing it by 1. Now you don't have to increment by 1, right? You could be incrementing by 2 or 4 or whatever, right? You can make this a more complex formula. Most people kind of go 1 by 1, so you do +1, but you can do whatever you want in here. In fact, you can even go negative. You can do j equals to j minus 1, right? And you can change this check. Instead of assuming the numbers always go up, you can say, well, the number is actually going down. I'm getting more negative each time. So then you can do j equals to j minus 1 or j minus minus, okay? And yeah, make sure you pay attention to here. I noticed for some people doing their assignments or whatever, they kind of got caught up because they were leaving the semicolons out. You really should put the semicolons in there, okay? In some cases you can get away without it, but I think just to keep things simple, just make sure you get everything in there with a semicolon, okay? I see I'm hitting at the 18-minute mark, so I'm going to take a pause here, and then I'll cut a new video that goes through more examples of us going through a for loop.